The story of what really happened to her is horrific and deserves to be told and absolutely matters. And the story of what happened to me was horrific and deserves to be told and absolutely matters. And I absolutely deny any idea that there is some zero-sum relationship between the two. I've had people reach out to me and say that my baby should be murdered so that I know what it feels like to be Meredith's family. But I do not feel like I or my daughter need to apologize for existing. One thing that I do wonder is if it's because I'm a woman. And because, as a woman, I'm expected to disappear.
Hello and welcome to Ways to Change the World. I'm Krishnan Guru-Murthy, and this is the podcast where we talk to extraordinary people about the big ideas in their lives and the events that have helped shape them. My guest today is Amanda Knox, who became internationally famous after the murder in 2007 of the British student Meredith Kercher in Perugia, Italy. Because Amanda was accused and convicted of Meredith's murder and then ultimately acquitted in 2015 after years of legal twists and turns. She has since written and spoken extensively about her experience and has advocated for others who may have been falsely imprisoned. Her latest documentary, Mouth of the Wolf, sees her return to Perugia, where she spent 4 years in prison, and confront the prosecutor who pursued her relentlessly to try to seek closure. She's also a podcaster now, and her latest series is about the case of Lucy Letby, the nurse convicted of murdering babies in her care. And we'll get to all of that in due course. But we'd like to begin this podcast with a big question, which is if you could change the world in any way, how would you change it?
I think I would change it so that we celebrated people when they admitted that they were wrong.
Explain why.
Well, I think that just around the world, culturally there and socially, people are afraid to admit when they are wrong. And they are incentivized both consciously and unconsciously to deny any kind of evidence that would suggest that anything that they have staked a claim to is we push away the evidence that suggests that we are wrong.
Do you think that's what happened with the prosecutor in your
Absolutely.
case, and why he didn't change his mind sooner?
Yes, and I think that that's actually one of the sources of conflict in our world, in the broader sense, is that we invest ourselves so much in what we claim about the world, and we're afraid to take any backstep because we're afraid of being punished, we're afraid of being ostracized. And so I'm imagining a world in which, instead of someone being pushed away or ostracized or punished for admitting that they are wrong in light of new evidence, instead a world where we embrace someone even more and celebrate them even more and reward them for being willing to change their mind in light of new evidence.
So what should we say about Mouth of the Wolf, the documentary? Do you want to explain, the idea, if you like? It was directed by your husband.
Yeah, we can blame my husband.
Shot over several years.
Yes, so the documentary itself, Mouth of the Wolf, is my husband's doing. He documented my journeys back to Italy. So the thing I can take credit for is the choice to go back to Italy. I was struggling in the aftermath of everything that happened to me in Italy to reclaim my identity, reclaim my reputation, but also I was struggling with this haunting question of why. Like, why did this happen to me? Why did my prosecutor take one look at me and think, oh, there's my rapist and murderer? And when the actual evidence came to light that it was this local burglar who had his DNA all over the crime scene, he had a history of breaking and entering, why he didn't admit that he was wrong and just pursue the truth as opposed to pursue the case that he had already pre-constructed. And so I was struggling with that question because a lot of people around me were telling me, well, it's because he's evil. He doesn't care what the truth is. And that always struck me as wrong, that was oversimplified. That was a very black and white explanation. I wanted the truth. And so ultimately what I did is I reached out to him to ask. And I had this little idea, this crazy optimistic hope that if I could just meet with this person outside of this adversarial system, outside of this very judgmental culture, in a space where we could just see each other as real people, he must realize that I'm not the person that he thought he was prosecuting.
But why did it matter to you so much what he thought? Why didn't you just see him as an official who was doing his job, who was pursuing the evidence and seeing where it took? It wasn't personal for him. It was professional. But it
was
seems
personal
to matter
for me.
massively. Of course, it was massively personal for you, and it was your life.
Yeah.
But what's really interesting, I think, in the documentary is it seems to be so emotionally important to you.
Yeah.
What he thinks.
Yeah. I mean, in a way, he stands in for all the people he convinced of his story that continue to have an impact in my life. I still feel like every day, 18 years later, I'm proving my innocence every day. And a lot of wrongfully convicted people feel that same way, that the stigma of the wrongful accusation still sticks to them. But I think beyond that, it's about how do we exist in a world where the whole world can turn against you for seemingly nothing. And I feel like if I'm going to exist in the world and have faith in our institutions and have faith in our society, I personally needed to understand how this man came to view me in this way and had such an outsized impact on my life.
When you say the world turned against you for seemingly nothing, you mean because you were acquitted?
Yes.
I mean, the world turned against you because you were portrayed in court and the media as this monster.
Yes.
Who was...
But on the basis of wild speculation is what I mean.
But that's why the world turned against you. What I mean, it wasn't for nothing.
Yes. Yeah, no, of course, obviously. Someone raped and murdered my roommate. There was a very serious crime that very much was committed, right? And so the pursuit of truth in that case, however, was completely lost in the pursuit of this scandalous story.
So can you talk in sort of bigger terms then about your whole approach to your life afterwards, which has involved a couple of documentaries now, a drama series, your memoir. You have very much taken ownership of your own story, having had it told by the court and the media.
Yeah.
Now, a lot of people find this difficult to understand. They say, well, why don't you just get on with your life the way your co-accused Raffaele did, try and leave it behind? Can you explain, what your whole approach has been to why it's been so important to retell your story your way, in your words, and to keep doing so?
Yeah. Well, it was stolen from me. My identity, my story, my past, my present, and my future was stolen from me. And no one was handing it back. So I had to take it back. And I think that a lot of people who have been wronged, who have felt like they haven't had a say in their legacy, in who they are, how they exist amongst people in the world, that's a devastating existential reality. There's actually a psychological term for it, for that crisis, that agony, and it's called narrative foreclosure. The feeling that you're not the author of your own story, you're not even the protagonist, you're just a villain or a victim in someone else's tale. And I was not satisfied to let that be my fate.
Do you feel your life was ruined by this?
I was a 20-year-old girl who went from anonymous to one of the most vilified and slut-shamed people on the planet. Yes.
And is that still how you feel? Do you still feel now? There's a moment in the documentary where you talk about a part of you dying in Perugia, the girl you were.
Yeah.
The girl you might have been.
Yeah.
Do you still feel now that your life has been ruined by this?
I feel that I have worked very, very hard to make the most and the best out of a really horrific set of cards that was placed before me in ways that I was absolutely unprepared to handle. And I've been really lucky to have the support of my family and my communities, strangers who came out of the woodwork to support all of us as we pursued truth and justice in this case. But it has not been easy. And like I said, I still carry the stigma of someone else's criminal actions on my own shoulders, because a lot of people out there don't even know the name of the person who actually raped and murdered Meredith Kercher. They associate that crime with me, something that I had nothing to do with. I'm known for something that I didn't do. And the prospect of being known for something that I will do is a difficult prospect. I don't know if I'm ever going to accomplish anything that will come to define me more than this thing that I didn't do.
What do you say to people who say, well, you present yourself as a victim, and there's no doubt you were a victim of a miscarriage of justice, and it had a horrific impact on your life. The original victim, of course, was Meredith. I imagine it's always been very, very difficult for you to know how to feel about Meredith as the victim of this crime, because you didn't know her that well, did you? At the time. I mean, how long had you known her when the crime happened?
We had been living together for like 5 weeks. So yeah, I didn't know her very well, but she was my roommate. She was my friend. Like, have you ever studied abroad?
No.
Okay, well, when you're a young person who's in a new place, meeting all new people all at once, those relationships become meaningful. Like, she was of the people that I was living with, she was the one who was most like me. I was living with 3 other roommates, 2 of whom were Italians who were older than us, who had been friends for a long time. And then it's me and Meredith, the new girls in the house. And she was a year older than me. She was also studying abroad. She was also interested in journalism and writing. And so we really had a lot in common. We liked to dance. We liked to eat pizza. So we would hang out with each other. So sure, I didn't know her for that long. But that doesn't mean that what happened to her didn't greatly disturb me, didn't shock me, or isn't something that I think about every day. Like, what happened to her could have happened to me. And it's just a fluke that I happened to meet my boyfriend 5 days before this crime occurred, and that I happened to be sleeping over at his house when it happened. Like, when I think about Meredith, I mean, this is a person who had her whole life ahead of her, just like me. And so I relate to her as this sort of like other side of the coin, and that fate flipped a coin and it landed heads and tails, and I just happened to land heads and her tails. And what happened to her could have easily happened to me. And so, I mean, in many ways, I do think of myself as the lucky one of the 2 of us. But that doesn't mean that our victimhoods are in somehow competition with each other. They're in conversation with each other, because
Can they be separated? I mean, the way you describe it, they are sort of inexorably linked, flip sides of the same coin. I mean, is there any way in which her death, her murder, is a ghastly outrage on its own?
Absolutely.
Separate to you?
Yeah.
Which hasn't,
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Absolutely. The story of what really happened to her is horrific and deserves to be told and absolutely matters. And the story of what happened to me was horrific and deserves to be told and absolutely matters. And I absolutely deny any idea that there is some zero-sum relationship between the 2.
I mean, the tabloid press is sort of an absolutely fundamental part of what happened to you, the way you were portrayed.
Mm-hmm.
And it never stops. Today, there is another story about how you're cashing in on this terrible thing that happened. How do you deal with that? How do you process? Do you ignore it? Does it still hurt?
I don't like to give it oxygen by even deigning it as worthy of consideration, because frankly, you do not hear that kind of allegation towards any other wrongly convicted person. Other wrongly convicted people tell their stories without being asked to apologize for it. Because, again, it is not at the expense of the original victims of the crime. It's not. It's a different story that deserves to be told in its own right. And so it is painful to me that people still feel like I have to apologize for existing. I mean, can I tell you something a little bit personal? It a little bit relates to when I say that it feels like not only should I apologize for telling my story, but also it feels like people want me to apologize for existing, is when things happen in my life that are part of just me moving on with my life, like getting married or having children. I have people reach out to me, the same kinds of people who say I should apologize for being here or I should apologize for telling my story. Those same kind of people are reaching out telling me, you know who will never get to have a family, to have children? Meredith. As if I should be ashamed of having a family, having children. I've had people reach out to me and say that my baby should be murdered so that I know what it feels like to be Meredith's family. And I am not confused about how cruel and unfair and ridiculous that is. It still hurts, but I do not feel like I or my daughter need to apologize for existing, nor do I feel like, again, that me telling the story of what happened to me, the institutional failures, and the journey of coming to terms with trauma and what it takes to reclaim your life after you have been through something like that, what it really takes. I've had to grow. I've had to learn. I've had to change over the course of this terrible thing that happened to me. I do not apologize.
I mean, you're quite right that other victims of miscarriages of justice are treated very, very differently. So why do you think your case and you as an individual are treated the way you are? Is it because of the salaciousness of the original construct in the trial? You know, the story they concocted effectively about what had happened, which was sex and drugs and murder and, you know,
Sex and drugs and murder in other wrongly convicted cases as well. So
why is it different in your case then, in your view?
Why do you think?
Well, I think it probably is a combination of those things, in which the whole framing of the story was part of a culture I find really distasteful in general, which is the whole true crime area, that people love this stuff. And they love the detail. And you're part of that world now, which is what I wanted to come on to. But, you know, but that I think it was already set as young people, you know, young, beautiful people in a beautiful part of the world, a terrible crime involving, you know, some sort of weird sexual practices and drug taking along the way. There was so much for people to get into.
Mm-hmm. But there are a lot of cases like that.
People are unable to kind of just let go of it all. You know, people they say, well, some bit of that must be right. Some bit of that must be true. It can't all just be made up. And so, you know, so they don't forgive perhaps, or they think, well, there's something there that I don't know. But I mean, what do you think? It doesn't really matter what I think.
I mean, it matters to me what you think. I'm interested in what you think.
I mean, I think once a story has been framed, it's very, very difficult to unframe it.
Absolutely.
Is the point.
But the point is also that there are a lot of cases that are highly scandalous and that even rose to the level of like incredible coverage.
Although I think the difference in some of those cases is that it is the miscarriage of justice which became the huge story. You know, these were not necessarily, you know, there was one recently who was wrongly imprisoned for murder for many, many years, spent decades in jail. That murder itself is not one that is present in popular culture. It is the miscarriage of justice that we now know about.
Are you
In
familiar?
your case, you know, the case and the detail was reported in such detail
Sure.
that it is embedded in a lot of people's memories.
Well, are you familiar with the Central Park 5 case?
Yeah.
That might be. So that's a case
The
that
Donald
was.
Trump case.
Yes, the Donald Trump case, the one where he put out an ad, a full-page ad in the paper, calling for the death penalty of these teenage boys. That was a huge, scandalous case that was huge in the headlines and was covered extensively. You don't see that same kind of treatment towards them once they are
No.
out and telling their story. So what's the difference? The only thing and again, I don't claim to have like the solid knowledge of this, but one thing that I do wonder is if it's because I'm a woman. And because as a woman, I'm expected to disappear. I'm expected to be graceful and grateful and silent. And instead, I stand up for myself. And I think there is a double standard in terms of who gets to reclaim their narrative and have authority over their own story and who doesn't.
Have you done it yet?
I think so.
You feel you have?
I mean,
Because I don't know what more you could do to do it.
You know, my story is continuing to evolve as I, evolve as a person and I wrap my mind around everything that's happened over time. But in terms of like, does the public understand what really happened or not? That's a huge endeavor that I don't at this point feel I need to take responsibility for. And so in that sense, I feel like, Beyonce had her Lemonade album, I've made my Limoncello album, like I'm just like, I'm done explaining it to people. I've had to do the hard work of like understanding it myself. And I've shared that understanding with people. And now it's kind of up to people to like figure it out for themselves if they're still confused,
And do you want more than people just to conclude that you didn't do it? Do you want them to like you as a person as well?
Well, I mean, in the way that we all would hope that if we were to meet people, they would like us, but I'm not.
Because that's really hard. That bit is really hard,
Yeah.
I think, for public figures. And I suppose the reason I ask is I suppose, you feel not just wronged, but you feel misunderstood.
Yeah,
You
sure.
feel people don't know who you really are.
Yeah.
And you want to believe that you're a good person and a nice person, all those sorts of things.
Yeah.
But you are still bombarded on social media with hate and people who think, oh, well, people still think you did it and all those sorts of things. And as you say, the sort of the resentment of you speaking.
I mean, look, I don't
So how much does
worry-
that matter to you in terms of, there's a certain group of people who are just never really going to get who you really are?
I'm not as concerned about them because I don't take that personally, per se. I feel like that says more about them than it does me. I'm more concerned about, is the impact that I'm having in the choices that I'm making and the work that I do, is it having a positive impact? And that's what I'm mostly concerned about at this point. Like I'm not trying to like prove myself to you right now. I'm trying to have a conversation that is valuable and useful. And I'm applying my own experience to that, but it's ultimately to make a point, which is the world is a lot more complicated than we take it for granted. And a lot of times we approach people and stories through specific lenses that we don't even realize that have been cast in front of our eyes. And so a little bit, I'm living to prove that point and, publicly here to prove that point. But on the other hand, like I'm very comfortable with myself and my little world and my husband and my children and my friends. Like I'm good.
What we see in this documentary, though, is that actually there's a lot of people affected by these sorts of things and a lot of work that goes on that you get involved in to some degree. what do you do, or how do you try and help other cases and other people?
Wow. Let me count the ways. So one of the ways is by helping people tell their stories, right? So I do investigative journalism to examine cases, and then when I come around to an understanding of them, I might go on to advocate for certain cases. My podcast series that's coming out, Doubt, the case of Lucy Letby, is a very, very thorough examination of this highly controversial case that was brought to my attention, that I've been working on for the past 2 years in order to get it right. Beyond that, I mean, anything from people reaching out to me who are in the midst of some kind of legal or even like social ostracization experience. People reach out to me all the time to say, I'm feeling misunderstood. What do I do? Or I'm in the middle of a legal crisis. What do I do? Or I've finally gotten out and I want to tell my story. What do I do? And because I have lived this life that I have, it's like I've gotten a PhD in whatever this is. And so I can share those insights that I've learned the hard way with people who are going through it now. And that can be anything from just recommending, like, here are some red flags for if a journalist reaches out to you and says, oh, we want to do a documentary about your case. And I say, okay, well, here's some very pointed questions to ask them to like get a vibe check. Like I can do it, help them, people get a vibe check.
What sort of things you say? Give us an example.
Well, a big one is about timing. So if they tell you, you have to do it, like this is your opportunity and you have to do it now, like say yes now or you're going to lose this chance, I say walk away, because no one should
That's
ever.
never true.
Yeah, it's never true. It's a lie. And also, it's extremely manipulative towards someone. It doesn't. Someone who has been through this kind of experience of having their story stolen from them, not only are they victimized and have their freedom stolen from them, or say they're a victim of a crime and somebody traumatized them. Not only are they a person who is dealing with a trauma and trying to heal through the process of telling their story, they are potentially facing a further trauma of being taken advantage of and exploited by unscrupulous journalists. And I've had experience with those. And so I know how to weed them out and to protect people who are otherwise desperately attempting to heal through this process.
I mean, it's interesting, isn't it, what people believe in the criminal justice process, given we live in a world in which trust in institutions is
at an
all-time low.
Yeah.
Why do you think that is? That, is it that people want to believe the worst, do you think?
I mean, I do think that certain kinds of stories hit our amygdalas and it's almost unconscious that there's certain kinds of stories, the sex, the violence, the that trigger us in a particular way, so that we have an automatic emotional response that overrides our rational ability to process information. And I think that media institutions take advantage of that in order to garner our attention for money, as well as social media. That's all part of the algorithm. And this is, I'm not saying anything revolutionary. People have recognized that outrage is the most the emotion that makes the most money, right? The most profitable emotion is outrage. And there are certain kinds of stories and situations and people that trigger immediate outrage. And I think that those kinds of stories attract attention. But you mentioned something before which I thought was interesting, that you're very turned off by those who are attracted to true crime. And I used to be that way too, in the sense that I don't find that relatable. I'm not a true crime person. I know it sounds weird. Amanda Knox isn't a true crime person, but I'm not. It's not something that I was interested in. I was a Harry Potter person. I was not a true crime person. But then I became the subject of a crazy true crime story, and I I at first felt very adversely like, oh my God, why are people just so like get their hooks into these kinds of things? Why are people so ravenous for these kinds of stories? It turned me off until I started meeting and talking to people who are just avid consumers of true crime. And I think a lot of it is one, that we like to solve puzzles. Like that's just like a natural, innate part of being a human is we're interested in if there's little pieces of the puzzle and we can put them together, that's a very satisfying exercise. But beyond that, there's also, I think people find satisfaction in thinking that they're helping people. Right? Like a
But
true
they're
crime.
not.
Well,
They're not, is the truth. And what they're often doing is causing great distress to the families of the victims.
sure. But I think that a lot of people, like, for example, there's a really controversial thing in the US, which is called CrimeCon. It's basically a true crime convention where true crime enthusiasts can go and take pictures of themselves like laying under a chalk thing on the ground. It's like, it's very sensational. It's the Disneyland of horrific crimes. And yet, a lot of victims' families go to these places because they're seeking truth and justice, and they find that the law is not equipped for the task. A lot of the missing persons cases are unsolved crimes. And so these people, the very victims, the most vulnerable people, go to this community because that passion, that interest that community has may be the thing that makes or breaks the case and reveals truth
How did
for
you
their family members.
How did you come to sort of balance or decide what to do in your own case, given you desperately wanted to tell your own story, and you've explained why? You also know that Meredith Kercher's family really didn't want you to. They don't want you to keep, talking about it at all. So how do you understand their feelings and yet do what you feel you need to do?
Well, so I want to clarify one thing is what I've heard from Meredith Kercher's family is that they regret that the truth of what happened to Meredith got lost in the midst of all the scandal. I've not heard from them that they believe that I shouldn't be able to tell my story. And in fact, I remember very, very much during the trial, I remember specifically a press conference that they did where they said, we don't want the wrong people to be in prison for this crime, obviously. They're good people, they're decent people. I've never had the opportunity to meet them, but I believe that about them. The people who say that about them, claim that about them, is their attorney. And so I do not believe him, or I refuse to take his word for it. But even
obviously, you reached out to your prosecutor. Have you reached out to them?
I have reached out to them before, and I've not received response. And I also do not pursue it actively because I feel differently about them than I do about my prosecutor.
It could be very distressing for them as well.
Well, it's very distressing for them, but also they didn't actively vilify me. That wasn't their mistake that was made. That was my prosecutor. He was the one who made that mistake. He's the one responsible. And so as his victim, I felt that I was absolutely 100% entitled to demand his attention.
I mean, in terms of sort of the world you're in now, and you mentioned the new podcast, which is about Lucy Letby. I mean, how did that come about? Because this is your first trip to Britain.
Yes.
Is that right? So this is not a case that would have been personally on your radar, I would imagine.
No, it was brought to my attention.
So it was brought to you.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, how do you avoid that sort of being exploitative? You know, that somebody puts you together with that case, it obviously creates an impression, you know, that this is...
You really hate true crime, don't you?
Well, it's not that I hate true crime, but what I'm saying is Amanda Knox doing Lucy Letby obviously says to people, this might also be a massive miscarriage of justice.
It might.
But the pairing itself is a big statement.
Yeah.
So you've got to be quite careful with that, haven't you? You know, the sort of the cases that people want to link you with or put you together with
Sure,
as a presenter.
Sure. I mean,
and given you didn't know the details of that case, how did you decide to do it?
well, I didn't immediately decide to do it when it was brought to my attention years ago. Initially, it was brought to my attention by people who said that they hadn't seen the kind of coverage of a very circumstantial, controversial case of a woman with no history of violence, no history of mental illness, no motive, and yet she's cast as this, monster serial killer, vilified in the press. They hadn't seen that kind of coverage since my case.
And convicted twice.
And convicted.
Yeah.
So same with me.
Yeah.
So
well, precisely. That's what I mean. So you can always say same. That happened to me, and I was a miscarriage of justice.
Yeah.
It doesn't mean the same is true of her, does it?
Absolutely. And this case is way more complicated than my own, in the sense that there was no confusion about there being a crime having been committed against my roommate. That was very clear from the beginning. In this case, actually, Lucy's case maps more neatly onto how women are typically wrongly convicted, which is that over 60% of cases of women who are wrongly in a miscarriage of justice case is women who were accused of a crime that never occurred in the first place. So in this case, we have a spike in deaths at a hospital. These are multiple deaths. So already it's a more complicated case because there's multiple deaths that need to be accounted for. But beyond that, these are very complicated cases of very sick babies.
But do you feel qualified then to sort of to go into it? Because I mean, I certainly don't feel qualified to relitigate it in a conversation like this. What I know is, 2 attempts at appeal have been rejected.
Mm-hmm.
The Criminal Cases Review Commission are looking at it. Mm-hmm. There's more evidence going into it.
Yeah, I was convicted twice too, and it was also wrong.
Yeah, no.
So I look at this, I do not approach this story as someone who's pretending to be a medical expert or an expert in statistics or even law. I'm a person who is invested in the truth, and I understand how narratives that form around criminal cases often blind or bias us in our ability to discern the truth. So as I went about investigating this process, I was not interested in, focusing on the character of Lucy Letby. I was focused on what is the evidence in this case, what does it reveal, and what was not delivered as evidence to the jury when they made their decision about her guilt. And it turns out there's a lot. There's a lot that the police did not take into consideration, that the medical experts that they used did not take into consideration. And there's a lot of also biased thinking about things that I do have some knowledge about.
So have you finished making it now?
So
or are you still doing it?
So I'm actually interviewing people tomorrow.
Right. Have you come to a conclusion yet, is what I'm getting at? I suppose, are you doing this because you think she has been wrongfully convicted?
So when I set about working on this podcast, I didn't know. And over the course of the investigating and producing this podcast, I've not only been concerned about what I have uncovered, but I've been greatly disturbed by what I've uncovered. And I do have very strong feelings about the case, but I also want people to listen to what I've learned and find out for themselves how they feel.
Yes, I mean, you're not the only public figure to say things like that. Obviously, there are a couple of quite high-profile politicians who've also waded into it. I mean, do you see this now as your future? That you will be doing this, for the foreseeable, looking at cases like, which may or may not be like yours, but which may or may not be miscarriages of justice, and that is your life now.
It wasn't my dream. That's not what I ever imagined for myself. And of course, I actually consider myself a creative person, somebody who, that's what I wanted to translate Italian poetry when I went off to study abroad, right? So I have my creative pursuits. I'm a mother. I'm very interested in that. But what I find time and again is that I'm called upon to help tell these stories in a rational way, in an empathetic way, in a way because I guess like I said, I've just learned so much over the course of my own wrongful conviction and public vilification that when someone calls me asking for help, it's hard for me to ignore, especially when so many people stuck their neck out for me when I was in the midst of my, horrible experience. There was no guarantee that just because I was innocent, I was going to get out and be freed and vindicated. And to this day, like, as you mentioned, to this day, innocent as I may be, there's still lingering feelings about it. So this matters. Like, people's lives get ruined. And if I can help in some way, it's really hard for me to say no. So I don't know. I'm just trying to do the best I can.
And do you think it works? That's the thing, trying to take control of your own narrative. I suppose what it can do is just kind of keeps perpetuating it, and it grows and grows. And especially in a world of social media now, can you ever actually be in control of your own story?
That's a huge lesson. It's more like, how do you learn to recognize what you have a say in and what you don't? And like really lean into where you have a say. And I think that the biggest thing that I've had to learn was to not be ashamed of who I am and what I've been through, and to have confidence that what I have to say does matter and is informed and is of value, that those years that I lost were not just wasted. And that's been my process. And that's something that I try to help other people. Like, I know people in prison right now, very likely innocent, very likely not getting out. And my advice to them is a little bit the same. What do you have control over? How can you make this life worth living? That's all we can do.
You talked in the documentary about wanting closure and the return to Italy being about that.
Yeah.
Did you get it?
Well, that's the thing about closure, right? Like, it's this pie in the sky idea, and you think...
It doesn't exist either.
Yeah. I mean, I think that we just carry these things with us in new ways over time. I think the thing that I did get out of this journey, rather than closure, was a reclaimed sense of agency. Like what I did actually did matter. Because when you've been in that experience of like utter helplessness, and everything you say and everything you do seems like it won't matter, that's a recipe for depression and suicidal ideation, frankly. And so I put my own agency to the test. And I came away feeling more powerful than I've ever felt in my whole life.
I mean, you still have this last conviction still hanging over you, which is for the criminal slander, which is about a statement you gave.
You've done your homework. Good for you.
Another defendant. Now, again, you said you would fight that forever. How are you going to fight that? Are you going to fight that? Or do you just have to say, you know what, that's something I can't do anything about now, and just move on?
The European Court of Human Rights has accepted my appeal, and they've even accepted it as an impact case, because never before has the European Court of Human Rights been asked to revisit the same case. They already ruled in my favor. They said that my interrogation was illegal, and I never should have been found guilty of that crime. And I'm bringing it back to the European Court of Human Rights to pursue justice, because I never should have been convicted. And honestly, I never would have even been accused of murder had I not been put through an illegal interrogation in the first place.
And so when do you think that will happen?
We should have a verdict within the year.
Right. And is there another telling of that process in the works?
Well, it depends. You can ask my husband. I don't do the tellings of things. I just do the things.
Good. And where do you think that will leave you if you win?
Well, it will leave me without a criminal record, which would be very nice, because I have a criminal record, and Recently, I went to Japan with my husband, hoping to finally do that honeymoon that we didn't get to do because of the pandemic. And I was detained at the border and sent back home because of my criminal record. So that would be one thing that I would love to fix. Beyond that, I would love to be able to not have anyone out there claiming that I'm a convicted liar, because I'm not.
Amanda Knox, thank you very much indeed.
Thank you.
Thank you for joining us. I hope you enjoyed that. If you did, you can watch all of these interviews on the Channel 4 News YouTube channel. Until next time, bye-bye.